We already knew this was going to be the worst week of the Trump presidency so far, because James Comey is scheduled to testify on Thursday about President Trump's attempts to get him to stop his FBI investigation of Trump campaign connections to Russia. It was scheduled. It was scheduled to be the worst week of the Trump presidency, and now it's going to be much, much worse starting tomorrow, because tomorrow the Senate Intelligence Committee will be hearing testimony from a man who, according to tonight's breaking news in the Washington Post, will be able to corroborate James Comey's claim that President Trump was trying to stop the FBI investigation. The Washington Post's report tonight says that President Trump did exactly, and I mean exactly, what Richard Nixon did, that led to the beginnings of impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives that then convinced President Nixon that he had to resign or be impeached and removed from office by the Senate. There has been much discussion this year comparing this investigation to the Watergate investigation. Weeks ago, Senator John McCain said this scandal was beginning to resemble the size and the scale of Watergate. And now, tonight, we have arrived at Watergate. This is Watergate. There is no question now that this investigation is covering some identical ground to the Watergate investigation, and that the peril to the president is just as great. The Washington Post is reporting tonight that the nation's top intelligence official told associates in March that President Trump asked him if he could intervene with then FBI Director James B. Comey to get the Bureau to back off its focus on former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn in its Russia probe, according to officials. On March 22nd, less than a week after being confirmed by the Senate, Director of National Intelligence Daniel Coats attended a briefing at the White House together with officials from several government agencies. As the briefing was wrapping up, Trump asked everyone to leave the room except for Coats and CIA Director Mike Pompeo. And tomorrow, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats is testifying to the Senate Intelligence Committee. There are now three people who we know about who can testify that President Trump tried to interfere with the FBI investigation. Those three people are the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who was a witness to the president's conversation with Dan Coats, and of course, the man who we will hear from on Thursday, former FBI Director James Comey, who says that President Trump used that same method on him that he used with Dan Coats. The president asked everyone to leave the room so that he could speak to Director Comey alone. That was on Valentine's Day. At the end of a meeting in the Oval Office with other national security officials, the president specifically asked everyone to leave, including Vice President Pence and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Sent them out of the room so that he could speak to Mr. Comey alone. And that is when, according to James Comey's memo about the meeting, President Trump said, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Here is the moment that convinced Democrats and Republicans in Congress that Richard Nixon was guilty of obstruction of justice and should be impeached. What you're about to hear is the Nixon tape of the Oval Office when the president agreed to the idea of asking the CIA to tell the director of the FBI, Patrick Wray, to stop the investigation of the Watergate scandal. Sound familiar? Asking the CIA to tell the FBI to stop the investigation. You'll hear the voice of White House Chief of Staff Bob Haldeman presenting the problem to the president.
Now, on the investigation, the Democratic break-in thing, we're back in the problem area because the FBI is not under control because Wray doesn't exactly know how to control it. And they have, their investigation is now leading into some productive areas because they've been able to trace the money, not through the money itself, but through the bank sources, the banker. So and it goes some directions we don't want it to go.
Goes in some directions we don't want it to go. That's the White House Chief of Staff telling President Nixon that the FBI investigation is going in directions they don't want it to go. He then told President Nixon that White House counsel John Dean has figured out the best way to stop the FBI investigation, and that was to get the Deputy Director of the CIA, Vernon Walters, to tell the FBI Director, Pat Gray, to stay the hell out of it.
The way to handle this now is for us to have Walters call Pat Gray and just say, stay the hell out of this. This is business here. We don't want you going any further. That's not an unusual development. And that would take care of it.
You could barely hear it on the tape. Richard Nixon simply saying, uh-huh, to Bob Haldeman's proposal. And that was all that Washington had to hear, Democrat and Republican. It's all anyone needed to hear in the Congress to be convinced that the president was guilty of obstruction of justice. Everyone in Washington knew how an impeachment trial would turn out in the Senate if Nixon went to trial. He would be found guilty and removed from office for saying on that tape what you just heard, uh-huh. Senator Barry Goldwater, Republican Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott, Republican House Minority Leader John Rhodes. Those Republicans went up to the White House, those three men, and told the president he couldn't survive this, couldn't survive that couldn't survive the revelations of what was on that tape that you just heard, that he would be impeached by the House of Representatives, that he would be convicted in the Senate, that he would be removed from office. And so at that point, and only at that point, did Richard Nixon finally do the right thing and spare the country an impeachment trial, become the first and only man in the history of the presidency to resign the presidency. And so the question tonight in Washington is, how low has Congress lowered the bar for President Trump? Will this Republican Congress hold President Trump to the same standard that President Nixon was held to? Because if they do, the House Judiciary Committee will prepare articles of impeachment that include at least 2 counts of obstruction of justice. What President Trump is reported to have said in his meetings about stopping the FBI investigation is a lot more than Richard Nixon's the that ended a presidency. Dan Coats, spokesperson, has issued this statement tonight saying Director Coats does not discuss his private conversations with the president. However, he has never felt pressured by the president or anyone else in the administration to influence any intelligence matters or ongoing investigations. Director Coats will be forced to reveal that conversation with the president to the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller. He will have no choice about that. He will be asked about that conversation with the president in tomorrow's Senate Intelligence Committee hearing, and he may refuse to discuss it in public tomorrow, but the committee might then demand that he discuss it with the committee in private. He is going to discuss that conversation. It's just a matter of time. This stunning news tonight about the president asking Dan Coats to intervene in the FBI investigation came minutes after what was briefly the biggest breaking news story of the day, the revelation that Attorney General Jeff Sessions has told the president that he is willing to resign if the president is dissatisfied with his service, and another breaking news report late in the day that former FBI Director Comey told Attorney General Sessions, don't leave me alone with Trump. That is how the New York Times put it in the headline of their report of this story, saying the day after President Trump asked James B. Comey, the FBI director, to end an investigation into his former national security advisor, Mr. Comey confronted Attorney General Jeff Sessions and said he did not want to be left alone again with the president, according to current and former law enforcement officials.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.